Self, thanks to the very warm and detailed welcome by Francis. I would just like to say a few words of thanks to my PSRU colleagues at the University of Greenwich, Public Service International Research Unit, for their contributions to the unit's research on water, both in the UK and internationally. And particularly, I would like to mention Professor David Hall, who will also be presenting at other events of the People's Commission on the water sector, Conor Gray, and Vera Wegman, the director of PSRU, who will be speaking today, later on Germany. And you can see here, I have put a link. This is where you can access all our reports, including reports that are produced very recently by Professor David Hall and Conor Gray on the UK leaking money, for example. I will just, taking a leaf from that report, but effectively, you can find all our reports are available online. Our philosophy is to share. I would like to start at why looking at the international experience. I'm sure that there is no need for that, but just to make sure I start from the beginning. It usually is good practice to do that. Then I will be looking at today's international cases, just an overview, a brief overview. And I will reflect a little bit about the benefits of public ownership and municipal ownership, as we can gather from the international experience, particularly in the global north, OECD countries. So, water privatisation in England and Wales. Now, the problems are well known by the People's Commission and their friends. They can be possibly summarized as long-term extraction of finance without investment, overcharging and high indebtedness, leading to water poverty, sewage pollution, leakage, deteriorating infrastructure, you name it. But what are the causes of these problems? I mean, what I usually say to international audiences with which I do interact, I keep reminding them that Ofwat is virtually the most powerful water regulator in the world, employing up to 200 professionals, very skilled professionals, and in principle, with considerable powers. But then, power is there to be used. And the problem with regulation in England and Wales is that there is such a thing as regulatory capture, revolving doors, regulatory complacency. And what I think is really the roots, the key drivers of the problems that we have been listing is that there are two compounding appetites. So when it comes to financial appetites, we're not talking about a zero-sum game. We have the appetites of private shareholders of the utilities that are summed up to the appetites of private financiers, like, for example, private equity funds. I'm sure that people and friends connected will remember the impact that Macquarie had as a shareholder of Thames Water, and which begs the question of why is it that Macquarie, the private equity fund, is nicknamed the vampire kangaroo. People might have a concrete idea of that. This is the leaf I've taken from the report Leaking Money by Professor David Hall and Conor Gray. If you look at the columns, blue is England and Wales, orange is Scotland, comparing how interest and dividends as a percentage of revenues on the left-hand side, and interest and dividends as a percentage of investment on the right-hand side. You can see that England and Wales towers for not virtuous reasons, but does tower the picture. And this is so the previous slide was actually suggesting that there is a benefit for comparing private and public, not only internationally but also at home. But talking about international comparisons, this is an attempt to chart the numbers of remunicipalization cases per year internationally. So the number of cases of cities taking back water into public ownership, reversing privatization, different forms of privatization, French style mostly, because French style privatization in the form of concessions or leases is the dominant model internationally. And we can see that there is a steep increase, particularly around 2010 and afterwards, from 2010 and following years. That was the Paris effect. Yeah, Paris remunicipalizing water in 2010, and many cities in France, but not only in France, following suit. And then we have a decline in the curve, which means that the numbers keep increasing 60% from 2013 to 2024 relative to what had gone on previously from 2000 to 2015. But there is a decrease in the yearly numbers of cases. And why is that? The reason is that the elites and powers who have an interest in preserving the status quo of privatization, where there is privatization, are organizing to make sure that there are more and more obstacles to the ability of communities to choose for public ownership, because public ownership is internationally very popular. And I just have to remember in Italy, 2011, there was a national referendum, and the majority of Italy's national voters chose to reject water privatization. There was an explicit choice for policies which included remunicipalization. So this is interesting to keep in mind. So the Independent Commission in England and Wales is not an isolated example. The Italian government failed to translate the vote of that that national referendum, and to make sure that that clear signal was translated into policy. Okay, let's look at the experience, especially the cases that we are going to hear about in more detail today. Paris is an important example of transformative remunicipalization. Started 2010, running till to date. Why do I call it transformative? Because thanks to the benefit of public ownership, the fact that public ownership is not subject to the imperative to maximize profits, to satisfy the appetites of private shareholders and private financiers, the public utility, the municipal utility, has used that managerial flexibility to reinvest all the available resources for the benefit of sustainable water development, the human right to water, financial degrowth. The indebtedness of the municipal utilities is close to zero. And so I very much look forward to hearing everything about it from Alice Stratt, who's going to speak in a few minutes. Alice Stratt was the architect of the Parisian water remunicipalization. Public water in Montpellier, France, where also water has been remunicipalized 2016, so after Paris set the example for many other municipal realities in France, but not only. We'll hear from Marine Colon, an expert consultant who has followed and supported the decision-making process in Montpellier about citizen participation, municipal regulation, and municipal ownership and very importantly, how certain tools have been adapted and adjusted to the municipal reality and the local needs. We'll hear about Vitens, that is the largest public water utility in the Netherlands, and taking a broader look at the Netherlands. Let me close my email. I think that my email is just down. Yeah, yeah. Looking at the Netherlands as a whole, I think it's important to keep in mind that water privatization was outlawed in 2004. So it might be interesting to hear from Ryan Klusterman, policy advisor and strategist for water infrastructure, Vitens, what he may have to say about it, especially the rationale for outlawing water privatization in 2004. But also it's important to hear what he has to say about Vitens and other Dutch publicly owned water utilities who usually are highly efficient. They have a very low leakage level, around 4%, depending on the year of measurement but 4% is certainly, you will agree, a dream scenario for many countries and certainly for England and Wales. It will also be interesting to hear about sunshine regulation, yardstick regulation without a central national regulator, just asking utilities to self-regulate thanks to transparency, looking at how they compare to each other. So Ryan Christemann, I very much look forward to your talk. And recording in Germany, we will be hearing from Vera Wegmann, Director of PSRU, about the national picture, the national scenario. And German utility is mostly publicly owned and mostly highly efficient. The average leakage rate nationally in Germany, I think it's around 7%, so still very low. And we will also be hearing from Ross Beveridge, senior lecturer at the University of Glasgow, about the case of Berlin, where water was remunicipalized in 2013, still remunicipalized to date. So we can see another example of the Paris effect, not in France, but at international level. And if we start thinking about it, when we look at Europe, Paris has remunicipalized its water, Berlin has remunicipalized its water. The Netherlands didn't need to remunicipalize because water was already public, municipally owned, and privatization has now been outlawed. And I think that what is also helpful to keep in mind is that when we talk about the top performance in the water sector internationally, usually the top performers are found in the public sector. There's not only, Germany and the Netherlands and Paris and France, importantly, but also, other countries like Sweden, Denmark, Japan. Yeah. So, looking at the conclusions, first of all, I would like to say that an important aspect of this absence of the imperative, profit maximization imperative, the imperative to extract rent to satisfy private appetites, is that there is managerial flexibility thanks to public ownership and municipal ownership. And that flexibility can help put efficiency at the service of the common good, however you interpret that common good. Human right to water, sustainable water development, water security, you name it. There are, of course, different situations in different cities and different countries. But the reality of public ownership is that that flexibility, that managerial flexibility that comes with the freedom from profit maximization and rent seeking enables to tailor the availability of resources of an efficient municipal and public utility to focus on what are the local needs. And usually there are varieties of regulation and citizen participation under public and municipal ownership from which it is possible to learn. So to conclude, I would just like to say, public ownership, know it, embrace it, use it. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Emanuela, and thank you for giving us a nice introduction and a good overview. I'm just reminded while you're presenting that, I mean, we're focusing on cases in Europe here today, but I was reading an article about the cases in the US of remunicipalization as well, which is perhaps somewhere we wouldn't expect it so much, but also accounting for quite a few of the cases of remunicipalization. Great. So I think we'll move on now to hearing more about the French situation. And our next speaker is Dr. Marine Collon from who works in Montpellier. Just as an aside, I had the great good fortune to work last year at a water research unit in Montpellier in France. And one of the really great experiences, apart from working with all my wonderful colleagues there, was living in a city where the municipality is actively trying to further social and ecological transformation, and that it's actually happening in terms of transport and housing and the food system and so on. And I think it's really worth just remembering that, you know, us wanting a different kind of water system isn't, again, a technical thing. It's about a vision for a better society. And I think that's possible. So Marine Collon is deputy head of the Joint Research Unit GEO, which is a water research institute there in Montpellier. She trained as an engineer, but now researches and lectures in water and sanitation utilities management. And Marine leads the annual observatory on competition for water and sanitation concession contracts for the French Biodiversity Office. The observatory is an organisation that works to provide data and annual evaluation of the organisation, management and performance of drinking water and sanitation services in France. So it's an example of the transparency, really. Anyway, enough of me talking. Over to you, Marine. Marine's going to tell us a bit about the system in France as a whole, and also the experience of remunicipalization in Montpellier. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Cleaver, and it's a great honor and pleasure to be with you this afternoon. Just a worry, can you see my slide? Because
we can.
Okay, that's great. So yeah, it's a pleasure, and well done again for the whole organization. Can you hear me right?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
great.
loud and clear.
Perfect. So I hope you will find this overview of the French system inspiring. In the lectures that I deliver on how water and sanitation services are organized in France, I often compare our model with your model in England and Wales, because it is so different indeed. But one thing we have in common is the fact that we have big private water companies playing a big role. In France, their role has evolved a lot. So I'm talking about Veolia, Suez, SOR. I'm sure you've heard of these big companies. Their role has evolved a lot. And especially after a major crisis that we have gone through at the end of the 90s, where we've found out that they were not meeting their contractual commitments, especially when it comes to investment. And a lot of, I mean, some cases of corruption have occurred. Unfortunately, you may have heard of the affaire Carignan in Grenoble, sadly internationally well known case. And I won't have time, of course, to explain the whole story, but I just wanted to highlight three key issues I find from the French experience that may be relevant for the discussion today, and end up briefly on the case of Montpellier with few highlights. I'll leave Anne Lestrade the time to develop the whole case of Paris, which is very relevant to England and Wales because the size of the utility in Paris is about an average size of a utility in England. Um, so let me change my slide. Can you see the slides are changing? Yes, okay, great. So let's get started agreeing on what we expect from water operators. We expect affordable and fair prices. We need a good performance to protect health and the environment. We want a continuous service, and we need transparency and also participation. This has been already mentioned. And why is it so tricky when we have private operators? First, there is in a situation of monopoly. So this is where we need regulator to impose rules and to make sure we provide the right incentives for them to achieve the objectives. The pressure of financial markets on all those big companies in France, in England, everywhere in the world. So this is well known, and we need to set up mechanism on the public side to prevent and to control this. There is a problem also of information asymmetry. What I mean by that is that the data that we need to make wise decisions on the development of infrastructure, on the level of prices, etc., rely on data that are in the hands of operators. And the fact that we need this data implies that we develop a whole system of reporting, analyzing data. And this is this is the role of Ofwat in England. But as you will see, and as it has been mentioned by Dr. Lobina, is that it can be organized differently. And you can do regulation without having one national regulator like Ofwat. And you'll see how it is done in France. And also another tricky question is the question of the vision that you have. There is a contradiction between the fact that private enterprise organize all their business plan, etc., within the duration of the contract. So this is their length of view, I would say. While when we talk about water, we are talking about long term. We are talking about making decisions for the next 20, 30, 50 years, even centuries for some investments. So it's very important to keep that long-term view, and I think it's key. So the first key message I wanted to convey here is the fact that it's very important to have on the side of the entities in charge of regulating the capacity first, and also the power to control. So Ofwat, as we've already mentioned, is doing this job of regulation, talking to, if I'm right, around 16 utilities, which is, well, there are a few compared to the French standards, so few but big. Because in England and Wales, you have managed in 74, if I'm right, to conduct this reform that we are still unable to push forward in France. This is the merging of all the local municipality services into bigger services. What is the problem that we have in France is that we have more than 10,000 local authorities in charge of regulation of organizing and regulating more than 20,000 utilities, and half of them supply water to less than 1,000 people. Sorry. So it is complicated. And many of these local authorities have to deal with contracts with big companies like Veolia and so on, and they just don't have the capacity to do it. They don't have the human resources, and it's so the life of many of our local authorities is quite difficult. And also there is a benefit in operating in a greater area than a small village, to be able to fight against inequalities between rural areas and urban areas, and also to organize safety plans to supply water from places where there is water to other places, etc., etc. But the good thing in the French system is that local authorities, what they have, and that is very useful for regulation, is they are deeply grounded into the issues of their territory, issues of water, but also they know the local dynamic. They monitor the urban planning, etc. So it gives a sense also, they are not looking at figures far away from the local situations and context. So they are deeply involved also locally. So I think this is an interesting question. We do have a national information system that was mentioned that we called CISPEA. It is meant to play a role of sunshine regulation also. We have also some issues, but I won't develop more about that. The utilities that may look like English utility in terms of size are the utilities of Paris, around Paris, Haute-Paris, Sédive, Siap. So that may be interesting to look at how they work. Then it's a challenge, I find, to monitor and to evaluate such big utilities. So the work of regulating so big utilities is still a challenge. The second key issue I wanted to mention is the ownership of the infrastructure. I think that what we have managed to do in France to keep the infrastructure in the ownership of the public bodies that are the local authorities and make sure that the investment is sustained is key. And so how do we deal about that in France? Mainly the water bills that we pay is divided in two. One part goes for the local authorities who have the long-term visions and are in charge of investment. And one part goes to the operators, be them public or private, who are in charge of, especially for the private sector, who tend to be more focused on day-to-day problems, operations, etc. They are in charge of replacing equipment that are worn out, etc., etc. And what has improved for the past 15 years, I mean 20 years, in France is the fact that from the water law of 2006, it has been compulsory in the contracts when there is a private operator to have an annual replacement plan to make sure that at the end of the contract, because the contract may last 20 years, it's quite a long time, by the end of the contract, to make sure that there is a regular investment and that the utility has a network at the end of the contract that is in good shape, that can work, because the problem we used to have before this law is that there was a tendency at the end of the contract where the monitoring was not well done, to have completely worn out infrastructures, and it was very costly. And the third element I wanted to mention was the fact that in France we have the choice to choose the nature of the water operator. So there's a choice to create a public operator nowadays that we call régie. So any local authority can choose at any time when the contract with a private operator ends, has to choose whether they keep on with a private operator, so they call for tenders, or they create a public water operators. And for that, they need to ask also to seek the advice of citizens. And what is this process of going for remunicipalization is a law that protects workers working in water utilities, that enables them to stay working where they used to work, whatever is the decision of the local council. So, for instance, so it is even mandatory for the water operator, be it public or private, that takes over the old one, the previous one, sorry, it is mandatory to offer positions to the workers working in water utilities. So, for instance, in Montpellier, the man who is heading the water production service today is the one who, for the régie, used to work with Veolia and has contributed to the building of the water treatment plant. And so when the Régie was created, he has chosen to stay working in his water treatment plant instead of following Veolia somewhere else. And I think it's very important. This kind of law can really ease and make this type of decision easier. Then there is another thing that is I find interesting in this, the fact that local representatives can choose the nature of the operator is the fact that often it's a political project. It is borne by a local representative campaigning for the mayor position. And so it's a project with a vision. And once a person is elected based on a program where he has campaigned for municipalization, for instance, it means it's a project that is approved by the citizens who have voted for this person. So it's a project where the local representatives would really help to facilitate the process, because such process, even if there is an agreement on the political project, it's a long process and not easy because there is reluctance. There is always reluctance for change, especially from the administration part. And so having this push and this energy is very important for the success of this project. So here you can see the picture of the man in Montpellier, a local representative who's been pushing for the creation of the régie. So you see on this slide the proportion of the French population that is supplied with water by public operators. So it seems like a kind of stagnation since Haute-Paris has gone for remunicipalization. But in fact, the figures will increase. The proportion will increase from 2023, since Lyon and Bordeaux, two big cities, have turned to create their own public water operators. So last point on the remunicipalization in Montpellier. So Montpellier is a city of 500,000 people. It's quite a unique dynamic in France. It's a fast-growing city. And we have a lot of challenges regarding water. We have basically, to make it short, little water and some challenges like tourism. So we really need to be good in terms of providing water, but also treating it. And so the project of remunicipalization, I mean, the people who've pushed through, the local representative who pushed, all have always had in mind to monitor, to control the full water cycle in the city, but it couldn't be done at one point. I think they needed first to test the model and then to see whether it could expand to sewage. So after the 25 years contract with Veolia, there was an election in 2014 where so the local representatives were elected on this project of Régie. And so finally in 2016, the Régie was created, so 2 years after the election. But still, it took few years afterwards to create, to make sure that the sewage could also be handled by the Régie des Eaux. And two things are, I think, interesting in this story. First, citizens have been involved from 2012 to think about what should be the priorities of the service. Sorry, Francis?
No. So
Okay. Okay. So, what should be the priorities for the next water operators? And also, they have contributed to the design of the future water operator, because public water operators can be of different nature in France, more or less autonomous, basically. And so they have really made some suggestions that have been adopted afterwards. So I think it's a very interesting story. And now they are supposed to keep on having a role of in a kind of observatory that is being thought of and not yet implemented. The other thing is that creating a régie requires a lot of energy and it's quite a sensitive issue and it's like creating a small enterprise basically. And so it's very complicated to, to deal with all the system and set up all the tools in one go. And so Montpellier, like I think Paris and other régies, have started still contracting out with their previous water operator to deal with some topics such as billing and call center. So it is a way to make a softer transition, I mean, from one system to another. And for sanitation, I mean, it's even bigger subcontracting because the régie has not put the hands on operations yet. Everything is contracted out to Veolia and SOR because the régie is involved in a big refurbishment project of the wastewater treatment plants. So they can't deal all topics at the same time. So they say, let's get started with subcontracting and then slowly and slowly we'll take over. So just to wrap up the messages, I think it's very important to maintain a capacity of the public body who's in charge of regulation and also to give the power to really influence the way operators work. There is a need to maintain the infrastructure in the public realm. I think it's really key and to find mechanism to sustain the investment effort. Private companies can still play their role. Finally, they bring technical expertise, they bring tools, they have their efficiency. That's why some local representatives in France still want to work with them, but provided regulation is done properly and the main objectives are met. And the long-term vision is still borne by the local representatives. The creation of public operators have opened really new opportunities in France. They solve many problems, but they raise other issues that we may discuss now. And finally, citizens' participation is developing in France beyond what is mandatory, and I think it's very promising, and we have to keep on in that direction. Thank you very much for your attention.
Great. Thank you very much, Maureen. That's fantastic. And thank you for keeping to time. You're making my job very easy here.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's great. So now we come to the bit where the panel members, the four of us, the panel of the People's Commission, is going to ask you some questions.
Yes.
And for the rest of the audience, if you have any questions or comments, please post them in the chat and we'll monitor them and deal with them at the end of the afternoon. First of all, I'm going to ask Becky, do you want to ask a question of Maureen?
Yeah, thank you so much, Maureen. And oh gosh, I have so much going around in my head now. It's so fascinating. I'm probably going to put some comments in the chat to see what everybody else here thinks too. But I'm just I'm thinking about what you were saying around data, and there's also some comments in the chat around that. And we see my concern, I guess, is that in our privatized model, data is held and self-managed by the water companies. It's very hard to make that open and transparent and public. And it feels quite defensive and it's used for regulation and performance. But actually, if we're going to innovate in the future, we need data for learning. And so I'm sort of interested, Maureen, in your system about how do we move from a place of people concerned about performance and how they're going to be measured. And I guess if they're going to be open to the challenge of a new model in a few years' time, they might be defensive and wary about sharing data. And the data that you need in order to develop and innovate for the future, and the public's engagement with that, because I'm guessing, how we design a water system, how we manage climate change, population behavior, Sheila has a comment in there. I'm sure Ewan's going to follow through on around public participation. But this notion of we've got to be fit for the future, how do you do that in this model? It feels like there's more potential, but it also feels like there's the challenge of the renewal, which might mean that it's harder to share data openly in order to learn and innovate. So it's a data and an innovation question, please, Maureen.
Okay, on the data, it's still a challenge. I mean, have not mentioned it, but we've had to wait the big crisis at the end of the 90s to have a law that would impose to the private companies to produce annual reports, meaning that before 95 it was not compulsory for them to provide data. And we have, from that time, we have evolved. I mean, the reporting system has been more and more developed. And now we are in a phase where private companies have understood that they had no choice but to be transparent. So I think they are trying to be as transparent as possible. But it is raising other issue because we are in the age of digitalization. It's so they tend to give even too much data to utilities, to local authorities, that the utilities and the local representatives and their technical services, etc., struggle to analyze. So it's a kind of a strange period that we are living in. It's that now the problem is not too little data, but too many data. And the data is not focused sometimes on the right element. I mean, local authorities tend to be very demanding in terms of data transmission, and because of the opacity that was there before, but now it's too much. So there is a whole work. I'm working. We are at Geo. We are working on a project that I was this morning in a meeting to show. We have producing guidelines to how to deal with that management of the data because it's key. But that's concerned the relationship between finally the body in charge of regulation and the operators. When it comes to open data to the public, there was a law in 95 who made it compulsory for local representative to present to the citizens annual reports about what has happened I mean, to produce data on the management of the utility. And this has been translated later on in this national information system that I was mentioning, that is meant also to produce data for the people. So all the data that are produced by the utilities and inform this national information system is public data. Anybody can access it. And you can download it, you can analyze it, and the reports are available on the internet. So this is what has been set up, but we still have some issues because there is a problem. Nobody has the time to make an independent evaluation of the quality of the data. And this is key. This is really key. We were talking about that this morning. Public money is really lacking, and now the state is more, the Ministry of the Environment is more in a mood of saying, okay, we will remove the few people working on this information system, spending time analyzing, I mean, checking the quality of the data. We will remove these people because we have no money anymore. So we don't invest enough to make sure that the data we have in this system is of good quality. So that's a big issue. So we still struggle with that. And it is key because if you want to take an informed decision, if you want also a system that are transparent to the people, you need to invest in all the information system and also in being able to certify that the data are of quality, reliable.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Maureen. I'm conscious of the time and I'd like to get a couple more questions in from the panel. Panel, can you just make sure you keep your questions quite short, please, so that we can get through it? Ewan, would you like to go next?
Yeah, can I ask is it just questions to Marine or Emmanuel?
It's the question to Maureen, yes, about you were going to ask a question about public participation.
Yeah, so in you mentioned Eau de Paris and you also had SEDIF and SEAP as the other really big water providers. I know that Eau de Paris has an interesting governance model with staff and service users. Well, I mean, the council's represented and then environmental and consumer groups represented. When the water services are contracted out to Veolia, do you see any examples in France of stakeholders still being on board?
Yes.
And if you could just perhaps explain whatever you know about SEDIF and SEAP's governance, that would be really interesting.
Okay.
Okay, we've probably got to keep that quite limited now because
Okay.
Okay, just very briefly, there is one participation that is mandatory by law for any water utilities in France. You need to seek advice from the citizens, so who are represented, I mean, from association, environmental association, or users association locally, who have to give their feedback, especially when it comes to choosing whether we want a private or public operator. They seek advice, then they are not compelled to follow the advice. That's another story. But then we have some innovative governance indeed. So in the public, like for instance, in the executive board of the Régie in Montpellier, we have representatives. There are seats for representatives of local association, environmental users. So they take decisions on tariff, on investment, on any topic that is voted in the board. And similarly, in Nîmes, not very far from Montpellier, there is a dedicated firm, I mean, a subsidiary of Veolia, who is managing the contract there. And under the request of the local representatives, when they were negotiating the contract, they agreed on having seats also in the board of the subsidiary of Veolia that are held by representatives of local associations.
Great. Just for everybody's information, it may seem that we're rushing through, but we're getting the headlines here, and we will be following up with speakers and with the questions identified and with writing the report. So don't worry if it seems like we're skimming over things. We will be coming back to you, Maureen.
Okay, great. Thank
ask
you.
more questions. Kate, did you want to ask a question?
Hi, yes, Maureen, thank you so much. So many things I'd love to ask you, but we're short of time. Water pricing, how are prices determined? Yeah, that's basically it. I'll leave it at that.
Yes, that's very interesting. So we have as many prices in France as many services, so 20,000 types of prices. So because for the share that is borne by local representatives, I mean by local councils, local authorities, sorry, there is a rule that in France, the fees that you collect from the water bills can only fund either the investment of the utility or operations. So this money, so when the local representative vote their annual budget, they have to set the price that will enable them to fund investments. So that's for the part that goes to the local authorities. And regarding the operator, especially when there is a contract, the contract is negotiated at some point, and then they fix a tariff that will be that will remain the same for the length of the contract, so from 5 years or 20 years. And then there is a factor that looks like the K calculated by Ofwat that takes into account inflation. So there is the part of the price paid to the private operator evolves according to inflation, but according to a price that has been negotiated when the contract was signed. Okay?
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
just
Oh, sorry.
so just are they wildly different across the country, the water
Yes.
prices?
Yes,
Yeah,
it
wow.
ranges from €2 to maybe €5. I think the most expensive is overseas in Guadeloupe. You know, it's still France, but it's a bit far away. It depends on many things. It depends on the ability to negotiate the contract. It depends on the complexity. It depends also on the level of investment. Some local representatives are very proud to say, oh, we have a very low price, but it's not good news because it means they don't invest enough in their network. So low prices are not always a good sign. It may also mean that there is not enough investment. So you have to find the right balance.
Great. Thank you, Marine. I think we're going to move on to the Paris case there. People, I think there's lots more questions, so do post them and we'll gather them up thematically so that we can deal with people's particular concerns at the end. I know there's a concern coming out here about people want to know more about citizens' participation, for example.
Okay.
I'm going to move on and introduce you to, thank you very much, Maureen, and stay on standby because I'm sure there might be more questions coming up in the chat related to your presentation. I'm going to introduce Anne Lestrade now, who's a senior consultant putting water operator partnerships. Anne was previously the chairwoman of Eau de Paris and deputy mayor of Paris when she led the revamping of the water policy and the remunicipalization. Anne also has international perspective because she's lived and worked in Taiwan and New York, but today we're really lucky that she's here to share her experience of the remunicipalization in Paris. So over to you, Anne. Thank you very much for being here.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you very much, and thank you for your invitation. I don't. Can you share my? Okay.
Okay, have you got the slides, please?
Yes. Even if I didn't update my LinkedIn profile, so now I am also a professor in university. So
Oh, sorry.
and
I cut out.
I live no, but this is my fault. And I live in Paris, in Montreuil. Happy to go back to Europe, to be
Yeah.
honest. So I would like to give you an insight from Paris experience. So maybe before starting, I would like to give you some political context of the reform, because it's true that as Emanuele and also Marine said, it was we can say like a revolution because of Paris and because of the power of multinational in France. So this political context is in 2001. We for the first time in Paris, we had a left winning, a left mayor of Paris elected with a new coalition. And I was elected at that time in 2001 as a city councillor. I am a Green, member of the Green Party. So we had this new political coalition, and it's important because it's not only for the first time in Paris, but we decided to really to change public policies and also political practices. So with this political turning point, we set up new public policies in many matters, in many sectors, and of course for water. So please, next slide. So the water service in Paris before 2010. Maybe also, I know I don't have a lot of time, but just for you to keep in mind that when Eugène Belgrand et le préfet Haussmann decided to create the Paris Water Service in late 90s, it was internally managed. So of course, all the investment were financed by the public. And this service was going on until a political decision made by Jacques Chirac. I think maybe some of you remind Jacques Chirac. So then the mayor of Paris before becoming the president of France. And in 1984, he decided to dismantle this internal water service and to dismantle and not to privatize, but to delegate. So to delegate its management to 3 operators, as you can see. So it was a complex organization because we had City of Paris as organizing authority, La SAGEP. So SAGEP, and after I decided to recall it Eau de Paris. But La SAGEP, it's a mixed ownership company. So what does it mean? It means 70% of shares were owned by the City of Paris, and more or less 30% were owned by the distributors, the private distributors. And we had distribution and billing delegated to the private sector. So with a split between Suez and Veolia, and the subsidiaries of Suez and Veolia. So Générale des Eaux for the right bank, and Suez Lyonnaise des Eaux for the left bank. So obviously, it wasn't driven by technical commitments and obligation, because if you read the contract, the former contract, it's obvious that it was much more written for interest of the private distributor, because this contract included a lot of pages for tariff and financial commitments, but only a few paragraphs for technical obligations. So with this complex organization, we encountered a lot of issues, and a lot of issues. It's not only issues in the perspective, in the view of the municipality. A lot of public reports, la Chambre régionale des comptes, la Cour des comptes, l'Inspection générale de la ville. So there are a lot of audit authorities in France at local and national levels that wrote quite hard reports on the service, on the water service in Paris. And what did they say? So of course we faced a splintering of responsibilities, as the graph shows, a lack of control and evaluation of the quality of the service. So at that time, the City of Paris and its water department, in charge of control and monitoring the service, was not able to have an accurate overview and control on the service. And one of the reasons also, and Marine said, is information asymmetry and lack of transparency, no democratic governance at all. And just to go back to information asymmetry and lack of transparency, it's important because Marine said that it's true that now there is an obligation to have annual reports written by the operators and by the for example, by Veolia and Suez when they are in charge of contracts. So this annual report, how can I say? It's okay. It's better than nothing. But when we municipalize the water service in Paris, of course, we discovered that they lied about many data. And one of the example is, of course, the amount of works carried out by the private operators, but also about the staff working in the service. So when we say that there is an evaluation by the report, no, it's not possible to have a good and accurate transparency and evaluation only through this report. Because if you don't have the operational of the service, it's really my conviction, it's not possible to have an overview and a good control and to get the accurate data. And of course, this dysfunctional organization. Generates a raise of price. So the water price sharply rose. And as you see, almost plus 200%. So it was, of course, unjustified by technical and financial reason, except that it was justified for a very high level of margin. Because, for example, in the annual reports, the private distributor declare around 7% of margin. But in fact, and also we discovered that when we remunicipalize, it was more than the double. So around 15 and I think sometimes 20% of margin. Next slide, please. So as I said, we came to power in 2001, and during the first tenure of Bertrand Delanoë, then mayor of Paris, and the first left and green coalition, we decided to get back the control of water service. At that time, the mayor of Paris wasn't convinced to municipalize. So it wasn't easy, and maybe before to explain the return to public ownership, I think it's important to tell you that we start by renegotiation. We start by renegotiation with the multinational, and to say, okay, it was a very lucrative system for you, but now we want to have tougher control on your activities, and also to have more investments in the network and maintenance and in the water service. So we succeeded to have to get back more than 150 millions of euro for works. But at the end of the negotiation, even if we had this new amount for investment, even if we succeeded to have more control on the water service, it was obvious that it wasn't enough to have a well organized and efficient service. So at that time, because I was appointed as the chair executive of SAGEP and after Eau de Paris. And when I was re-elected in 2008, I was deputy mayor of Paris and appointed again as a chair executive of Eau de Paris. So we decided to push the idea of a single operator in charge of all the activities in Paris. So as you see in the scheme, so now since the 1st January of 2010, Eau de Paris has the all service for drinking water. So then single water operator from the catchment to the billing and the end user service marine, because it was important. So it's a very important decision, because I didn't want, even if it was a very tough job, really very tough job, because we were under strong pressure to succeed, of course. I faced a lobby campaign very hard. So I no time to explain, but it was very hard. But I didn't want, even if we carry out this transition in 1 year and a half, so it was a very short time. I didn't want to let the private distributor manage the billing and the end user center. And it was one of the first decisions taken by the new board, and I'm very proud of that, because we were convinced that it was much better to have this part in source, and it's the first time, because even when the water service in Paris was internally managed by the water department, so before the delegation of service, even at that time, the billing and the end user call center were managed by the private. So it was the first time that the billing and the end users call center is in source, and it's a very successful, because we can say that we have a very high level of consumption satisfaction. We won 7 years in a row the best consumer service, and just after we put it in place. And we also carried out a new range of service, like, for example, a leak and overconsumption alert. So it's a very proven success of public services. Now we have also a performance contract, because usually we say that, as maybe you can guess, I'm a proponent of public ownership. But of course, it means that we have to prove that it's possible to have a better service under public ownership. And we set up a performance contract, including 10 main technical, environmental, economic, and social goals, with 40 detailed performance indicators. This contract is monitored by the water department, so the city administration, but also by the board and also by the observatory. I will explain later what is the observatory, the Parisian Observatory.
Maureen, sorry, Anne, you've got about 5 minutes left.
Oh, damned. Okay. So, alors, in a few, so as you said, so maybe as you saw, we lower the price. So we lower the price 8%. Is 8%, and also we decided to carry out a social measure to help low-income households to pay the water tariff. We had a reform with clear benefits for Parisians. So now we have a long-term perspective, and all the water income are systematically reinvested. We have transparent purchasing and works, and it's very important, because now we have public tender for all works, and it wasn't the case before. We have also a price, and still now is the lowest water price in Île-de-France, and even one of the lowest in France. We rationalize, and we have, as I said, social aids for and water subsidies. We ban the water cuts. We develop the street water access, distribution, bottle and jerry cans. And please, if I have a few seconds, please, next slide. And we set up a new democratic governance. So a new board. So now we have, of course, elected official, but not only. So 3 representatives from associative sector and personal representative with voting rights. And it's very important. So it means that they have all the same voting rights for, well, all the activities. So the investment plans or strategic policies, or everything. We also launched a participatory democratic body, the Parisian Water Observatory. So created in 2006, but much more powerful after municipalization. And now it's a place to debate on water issues. And also to finish, not fully finish, but yes, please, the next slide. All the benefits generated by this reform is acting for sustainability. And I think it's very important because we carry out new policies for biodiversity, for the preservation and conservation of the water quality, for we have climate plan, and all this overarch policy to promote, to promote tap water, to promote public services, but also to increase awareness among citizens on the goals and the objective of public policies. But also we had new mechanism to help farmers to transition to farming, organic farming. So we have really a large range of mechanism, new policies to have a sustainable, resilient policy. So, and it's a really experienced, successful experience. We can say that. And you can, yes, thank you. The last slide. And we can say that 15 years after the reform, we have real performance on all the levels, sustainable levels, so democratic, social, economic, and environmental, of course, environmental levels, proven and based on evidence. And I think one of the reason if we deployed really, and we developed a public policy to demonstrate that not only it's better to municipalize, but it's also possible to demonstrate that we can create today a new public ownership, new public utilities. And it's very important for me, so I really would like to conclude on this point, to stress that, because I think that it's not old-fashioned, because usually we heard that, private is more efficient, but really we demonstrate that it's not true. Odeberry was much more innovative on many plans than before with the private management. So it's possible to remunicipalize first, and it's possible to create new, efficient, resilient, and sustainable public service. And I think it's a future. But of course, for that, we need to have a strong willingness, and first of all, a strong political will to implement this policy. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Anne. And I'm sorry to rush you. It's a really rich presentation, and there's so much to learn from there. we're limited in the questions we can ask, but I really liked your point about the future vision and the strategy and, the relationship to climate and other measures. But what I want to ask you myself, I'm switching to a panel member question here, is you mentioned at the beginning about infrastructure and getting some money back from the water companies for not doing enough work, as I understand it. In Britain, in England, we're often being told that the reason we need to pay higher bills is because of the crumbling infrastructure, that the infrastructure hasn't been invested in. So I just want to ask, was there a need with the Paris system to invest massively in bringing the infrastructure up to a point where you could run it well? And if so, did you pass the cost of that onto the users?
Well, we decrease the Paris,
Yeah.
we decrease. So it means, what does it mean? So now Eau de Paris invests more than before. So it means it's possible to invest more, even with a lower water tariff than before. And why? One of the reasons, of course, we don't have shareholders. All as I said, there is no private margin. So everything, when a Parisian pay the bill, he pays only the activity of the service. It's possible to have a high level quality of service with a good price. And what we saw that can I say that in a few seconds? So that it's important to understand that the private distributor had the most lucrative parts, so they didn't invest enough. They invest. I cannot say that they didn't invest. They invest, but not enough. And of course, all the main investments, so for the infrastructure, for the treatment plants, were in charge of the mixed ownership public companies. So the main investment were financed by the SAGEP, and after became Eau de Paris. So it was obvious that when we renegotiate with the distributor, we discover that, and when I say that, okay, we succeeded to get back 150 million, but at that time I disagreed with the socialist I was green, and I say we could, and I know that we could have much more than that, because they run lucrative contract, and it was a partial part of the margin they gained, during actually, yes, almost 25 years contract. So no, it's possible. Usually they don't invest enough because because there is, as I said, we don't have enough data, and I think it's a key issue to have the accurate data and the investment and accurate data and the quality of the service. And they don't invest enough because yes, there is not enough obligation for them, and there's not enough pressure on that.
Great, thanks. I'm just going to move on and ask the panel members if they want to ask any questions. But somebody's asked, can we have access to the slides after the event? And the answer is yes. They're going to be on the website. We'll update them and put them on the website. Also, if you look for this event, that we're posting resources like background papers, some of the papers that are mentioned here, reports and so on, are all there. So for anyone who wants to look more, that information will be there. So there'll be plenty of reading for you.
Yes, I will send you also a paper written in
Oh,
English.
please do. Any of the speakers, if there's anything else you think we should look at, please send it. Kate, would you like to ask something?
Yeah, thank you so much, Anne. Oh, it's just so inspiring, and like so many familiar stories about private sector not investing and making lots of money. You mentioned the lobby that you faced, which I'm guessing was from the private sector. Just wondering how that was resolved and if there's any lessons for us in trying to deal with these powerful private companies here.
Yes, a lobby, because as you say, France has this, I don't know, privilege. I know it's not a privilege, but this particularity to have the major multinational. So France has delegated the water, sanitation, and energy service. So we have Suez, SOR, Veolia, very powerful multinational, and Paris is the capital of the country. So of course, a lot of pressure. And to be honest, Veolia and Suez were convinced that at the end, the mayor of Paris, comment dire, not, they thought that Bertrand Delanoë wasn't enough courageous to set up this policy. But okay, they were wrong, but how in yes the pressure the lobbies for example I was blacklisted, to be honest. I was a deputy mayor of Paris, for the capital of France, and in France there are a lot of events and national events about water policies. And each time, there are some phone calls, for example, to the organizers, say no, it's not possible to invite Anne Lestrade to explain what they want, what she wants to do. So it's I don't know, many different kind of lobbying, just um, to avoid this decision. Political lobbying, unionist lobbying, of course, academic lobbying, because they are very powerful. They have a lot of money. So what does it mean? It means that, of course, they paid a lot of political campaigns, but also they gave money to unionists, but also they gave to some unionists, but also they gave money to newspapers. For example, some journalists told me that for them, and they are quite upset of that, they couldn't interview me in some newspaper to explain the reform, because of course this multinational gave a lot of money for ads. So different kind of pressure, lobbying. But as I said, if you don't mind this kind of pressure and if you have a political continuous will, it's possible. But it was, to be honest, it was hard and very tough. But it's possible. And now the landscape, the water landscape in France has changed. And now this kind of pressure I faced, I think won't be possible at that level.
Okay. Great. I'm going to ask Ewan if you'd like to ask a question.
First of all, thank you so much, Anne. It was super interesting. When the Paris Olympics happened, sewage flowed into the rivers, and so people in England were going, "Oh well, look, public ownership doesn't work that well. Is the water?" I know a series of answers, but I'm just wondering how might you respond to that sort of very common charge that public ownership hasn't really cleaned up the water?
What I can say. So yes, it's a coincidence, but this morning I visited. I had a visit in. I visited the, how can I say that? Le bassin d'Austerlitz. So bassin d'Austerlitz, it's a huge infrastructure to collect the like sewage and used water before and to avoid that this water go to La Seine. So it was built by public engineering. It was built with public funds to avoid pollution in the Seine. So at the end, we succeeded to guarantee the bathing in La Seine because of this infrastructure financed by the public and controlled and designed by the public, the water department. So there is some. I can send you. I can send you also some a little document explain what was carried out, what kind of works were carried out to face this risk and at the end to succeed because it was I'm pretty sure that it was impossible if we had a private management.
Great. Thanks very much. I think we're running slightly over time and it's time for a coffee break. So I'm going to say thank you very much to Anne. I know Becky and other people have posted questions in the chat. So do feel free if you want to respond to the questions posted in the chat as well to make that a bit more of a discussion. We're going to take a break now. We're only going to take 5 minutes so we can catch up on some time, but hopefully it's time for you to take a quick comfort break and renew your concentration. And then we're going to come back and hear about the case of the Netherlands. So thanks so much, Anne, and back in 5 minutes to hear about the Netherlands. Okay, everyone? Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Right. Okay, so I hope you've all managed to do a speed break. Just before we get started with the Ryan Kloosterman and the Netherlands case, I'd just really like you to encourage to write your questions in the chat and also to respond if you see anything you want to respond to, speakers and audience, because that really helps us to get an idea of what people's concerns are, what the issues are. And what we're really looking for is picking up on what people think are good ideas, what the ideas are for the future, what we could bring into our system here. Okay, so let's carry on with no further ado. Ryan Kloosterman is a policy advisor on strategic asset management at Wittens, which is the largest water utility in the Netherlands. He trained as a civil engineer and he's got over 35 years of experience in the drinking water sector. And at the moment, he's responsible for the long-term planning to make drinking water infrastructure future-proof. So I think that's a very interesting idea, that we're thinking longer term. Ryan is chairman of the programme committee of GIFRA, I don't know how you say that, where large infrastructure companies in the Netherlands work towards an integrated vision of how to equip the infrastructure in the long term. And he's also the member of the board of REWA, a collaboration of Dutch water companies using the River Rhine to produce drinking water. Okay, he's got substantial international experience on the challenge faced by drinking water companies, but he's going to share his experience of the Netherlands right now. So it's over to you, Ryan.
Thank you, Professor Klever. The next generation infrastructure.
Next generation infrastructure. I like the term, yeah.
First, I want to give a little bit an overview about some characteristics of the Dutch water sector. In the Netherlands, there are several organizations are responsible. So we have the water boards. They are a local government and they are responsible for the sewage treatment, the dikes and the water system. So for water conservation, etc. Then there are 10 drinking water companies and they are public owned by the municipalities and the provinces. And I'm working in a drinking water company. Emmanuel Lubin, he said it's sunshine regulation, but we have a lot of regulation in the Netherlands because our tariffs are controlled by national regulation. We have the WACC, the weight average cost, and something, weight average cost, and we have to comply to that. And of course, to the shareholders, and they are also interested in the tariffs and the increase of the tariffs. The drinking water companies and the provinces are both responsible to get enough water resources, and the quality is controlled by a lot of regulators, but it's based on EU standards. And well, the investment plans, we have to comply or we have to ask permit or if it's allowed to do those investments and to increase the tariffs or to reduce the tariffs by the non-executive boards. Well, there was a lot of discussion or presentation about privatization, public. Well, we are owned public, and in 2004 there was a lot of discussion in the Netherlands to make the water companies or to privatize the water companies. But it was a lucky coincidence. It was not done because two non-executive members of a water company, they were of different political parties, and the two political parties they were a member of, they were responsible for the governance in the Netherlands at this moment, and they both thought it's not a good idea to privatize it, and they lobbied both in their own party, and they were successful, and based on that, it was not privatized, but it's a lucky coincidence. And yeah, well, we are now working, well, it didn't change. So we had to challenge to prove that we can work as a public company on a very good way. Well, here you see some numbers about the number of employees. It has been higher, but due to a lot of mergers, it was lower, but now it's increasing again. The number of connections, about every house in the Netherlands is connected. The length of the drinking water, well, production, the sales. At this moment, the tariffs are increasing, and because the investments are increasing, and that's due mainly reason for that are the replacement, but also to make the infrastructure more future-proof. Well, I come to that later, but this is a general overview. You can say a lot more in the attachment. I've put a lot of data. I can show it, some background information about now, a lot of data. You can find it in presentation. I will not present it in detail. Well, what are the lessons learned? We have an increasing drinking water demand due to population growth and climate change. And that, well, we didn't expect that. We have had a more or less constant water demand for 15 years due to water savings. But, well, the last years, and we think it's due to climate change, we need more water. We need more water resources. And climate change made that the high demand of water in the past, we could predict it. We could manage it because it was in the hot summer, but now it's in the spring. It's in unforeseen periods, and we have higher peaks. And the drinking water infrastructure, you will have to design it for the high peaks because we have the obligation to deliver enough water even in high peaks periods and in high water demand periods. So That's the challenge. And we realized we cannot deliver enough, and we had problems during the hot periods, especially in the Netherlands. It was hot in 21, 22, 23. And 3 years after each other, we have problems with technical problems with delivering the water to the place people want to have water, and the permits for water resources. We could not comply to them because we need more water, so we extract more than was allowed due to the permits, and that was not accepted, or not accepted. A lot of people were complaining about it. Farmers were complaining about it because they said we have more drought caused by the higher extraction of water due to the or caused by the drinking water sector. So they complained. They found, or they go to the court, and we have to pay millions of euros if the court agrees they are right, to the farmers due to extra extraction of water due to the peak periods. Normally, we also pay drought, or we pay money for the drought recourse to the farmers, but they want millions more in that period. And a lot of people were complaining. So that's the lesson. We were not prepared for the situation caused in the 3 hot and dry years. And looking backwards, we were very busy with solving problems. We want to make it very robust, and try to deliver water as good as possible, not to deliver the minutes of water minutes lost, we call it. So the minutes we don't deliver enough water, it's a quarter of an hour, and we want to reduce that. And that was our focus. We were focusing on the actual problems on water quality and water quantity, but we were not thinking about the situation that it could change. And we have infrastructure that lasts 50 to 100 years. So if we are investing now, we have to think about the situation of 2121 or 2125 or 100 years ahead. And that's a major challenge to think about that situation, and to prepare for that, because it's difficult to explain to the public that you have to do investments for such a long period, and that you have to change the situation. It's also a financial challenge because we have to invest more and more to be prepared for the future situation. And it's also a technical challenge because what do you have to build for an unknown situation? And to solve that, we are using the concept of resilience. And that's the concept in the way how you are working, that you, in the past, we're making plans, and we worked on that for 10, 20 years, and then we realized it. But now we are preparing different options, and we are monitoring the developments. And based on the situation, we say, oh, we have to do this or that, or develop this, or not doing this. So we are preparing a lot of options, and that's a challenge also to the public to explain. Well, we are doing this, and maybe we're realizing this, and maybe another other thing. So we are not sure about what we want to do, but we think it's important to do it. Otherwise, you have to wait in an adaptive way. Otherwise, you're spending more money than necessary, a lot of more money, but you're also claiming a lot of space, confronting people with the impact of the water extraction. Well, that's in the way how we are working, but it also in what you're doing. Well, if you're looking to resilience, you can say it's a part of flexibility. In the technical part, it's about having enough flexibility, having enough robustness, having enough sustainability. It must be a logical, intelligent, coherent system, and there must be some tolerance. If there is a problem, you can still deliver the drinking water that is needed. Well, if we look to our current infrastructure, we say, well, on the 5 issues I mentioned before, we are missing flexibility. It's very robust. We have a low non-revenue water, but it's not flexible. We cannot bring water to other places if it's needed. If something changed, we have a problem, as was illustrated in the 3 hot summers. So we have to invest in more flexibility. That means more transportation pipes, other way of building of the treatment plants, because you need more modules, so you can bring one module to another place. So you must be able to change that. You need more standardization. We are the result of merging a lot of small municipalities together to a big company, but all the ancestors had their own system, and we did not bring that together and did not standardize it. And so we have to merge the technical infrastructure also to a new system. We did the merging for the people and the employees and the HR system, etc. But we did not do it for the technical part. And now we realize it's necessary to bring them together. So that's a challenge to make it more future-proof on a technical way, on an organizational way, because to have enough workforces to realize it's a challenge, but also on a financial and technical way. Well, if you look to drinking water, to the quality, we're facing water quality problems due to industrial challenge of discharges. The agriculture is very intensive in the Netherlands, and we are facing pollutions of nitrates, but also of pesticides. And then you have the sewage, and then the main problem is pharmaceuticals or small organic pollutants. There are all the obligation for water treatment plants is to treat the water, and then we have some steps. But from a drinking water point of view, we say it's not enough. We need more treatment for all the factors from the industrial discharges, because we're living in a delta. And so we also have problems from discharges in Switzerland or Germany or France, if you're looking to the Maas and Belgium. And that's a problem. And also we need more purification for the sewage water. And there is a European framework for water quality, and we are not complying to that. So we are having a problem in 2027 if we not can increase the quality of all the waters, and we think it's not possible. So we are going to a problem on the water framework. Well, and in the last point, there are some points to make it more resilient. I also mentioned, but something that maybe it's good to add, that in the past we thought we can use only one water resource for a city, well, that's enough. At the moment, we think that's not robust enough, because if you have one resource and you have a problem, water resource, and you have a problem due to climate change, because the discharge is not enough of the surface water, or the drought of the groundwater is too much, you need other resources. So we're combining it to a multi-water resources approach. We believe in highly that's important. Modularity and standardity, I already told something. And we need more transportation infrastructure because there are parts in our surfing area, especially in the eastern part of the Netherlands. It's quite difficult to extract enough water. We don't have much surface water there, very small aquifers for groundwater, but in the western part, it's much better. And at the moment, we're extracting water in the eastern part, but we think it's not climate proof and not future proof. So we should go to extract more water in the western part and to transport it to the eastern part. And the other part is also we have a lot of water resources, 103 different water resources, and also a lot of treatment plants. We think if we combine the water resources to a bigger treatment plant, we are more flexible. And we need more flexibility. If one water resource is polluted or cannot be used anymore, we can change it more easily to another or bringing another water resource without big changes in the drinking water infrastructure. Well, that's what
Great.
I want to say. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ryan. That's really helpful. I mean, for me, it's really interesting that you've got a very clear picture of the challenges facing any sort of water and sanitation supply arrangement. But you've also got these, what you see as clear principles for what you need, adaptability and flexibility and resilience in that system. But I just wanted to ask you a quick question about how far is there a public will or a societal will to change things? Because you mentioned about the farmers wanting to squeeze money out of providing more water, presumably from their land or whatever. So is there a sort of public consensus and a political will for a more water resilient society?
There is a political will.
Yeah.
The national government, asked the provinces and water companies to make a plan how to make the infrastructure more future-proof. And they also asked provinces to find water resources that are future-proof. So the regulation or the plans there is a political will in plans, but the actual political situation is that there are more populist parties, so that's more changing or it's less stable than it was in the past. And the impact of the more the new parties, it's difficult to predict what will be the influence. There are more political parties at the moment, more populist parties of the farmers, and they say, well, it's good to make plans, but not in the farmer areas. Go to the nature areas or to the cities or whatever. And the nature, they say, well, not in our areas. Go to the other areas. So it's a challenge. The political situation is changing very fast in the Netherlands, always in the world, I'm afraid, everywhere in the world. And the public is not directly involved. So it's more indirect by the political and not, we are not directly consulting the public.
Okay, great. Thank you. Becky, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, thanks. I'm really interested in innovation. So you're talking about a fairly catastrophic present, which we're experiencing too. But where are the new, I suppose, the new technologies, the new ways through this? Where are you getting those advances? What are you investing in? Where are you spending, I suppose, your R&D time?
Well, that's an interesting question. Thank you. R&D time, it's about new treatments. How can we treat the water of the future? And that's also a challenge because I'm working for a long time in the drinking water sector. When I started, we were very proud to measure pollutants in micrograms a liter, and now we're measuring it in nanograms a liter. So that's 1 million more detailed than when I started. So that's also an ethical question: what must be removed and what can be accepted. But that's an important part in the technology, in the ICT, in security. That's also an important part of innovation. In asset management, how to combine the replacement with making the infrastructure future-proof. What are the governance principles to do that? Governance, technical and technical sense. Can you change to the lifetime of the assets? Can you make them shorter? You will want to spend not more money than necessary. You want that the lifetime of the assets you want to change is at the same time at the end. So you can then, that's a good moment to do a new investment or to change a lot of things. Because it's difficult to change the infrastructure because you have 5 assets and 1 is at the end of the lifetime and 4 can last for 10 or 20 or 30 years, and that's very expensive to change it then. So we are doing assessments how to align the different lifetimes and to choose the good time to replace or invest. So we are working on that. Well, a lot on also on customers, how to involve them a little bit better. We're well, compared to the UK, the customer is very far away in the decisions, but we also think we have to involve them more because we are also using other water resources, and maybe we have to use sewage water. We're also working on that. And what's the opinion of the customers if they are not drinking groundwater, but if they're drinking sewage water, treated sewage water, of course. Well, we're also doing R&D on that, and what's the opinion and what will be the impact if we change the water resource.
Great, thanks. Kate, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. I mean, it's so interesting. I feel there's so much more we need to know about the Netherlands. Just one question. Do the companies work together on this? I'm guessing, obviously, the climate change issue works across all the companies. And you're talking about moving water from one part of the country to the other. So is it a cooperative relationship between the different water companies and utilities?
Yeah.
Just
yes, there is
missing with us.
We're working together in 2 ways. In lobbying. So to the national government, there is one organization in which all water companies are combined in the Netherlands, but also on European level. And we're working in a more R&D way. We are also working together with all water companies. They're spending a percentage of the income, I don't know exact, but we have 10 million euros for a company specialized in doing R&D for the drinking water sector. And beside that, the next generation infrastructure, it's of large infrastructure. So from the energy, the airports, Schiphol, the harbor, drinking water, that's next generation infrastructure. We're working together with the large infrastructures to think about how to make the infrastructure future-proof and how to lobby for that and how to get attention of the public and the government for that. So there are several collaborations.
Great, thank you. Ewan.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's really interesting, important. So you mentioned involving consumers more or customers more. I know that in at least in Groningen, you have 2 out of 6 of the board members chosen by the work council, which is like the workers, and the rest chosen by the council. So sort of 2 parts. One is that a model that you generally see across most Dutch companies, or what's the state? Dutch water companies, and do you have any examples of more direct involvement in choosing the board? And if not, I guess, what do you think is a good model to involve customers or bill payers?
Some of what companies have delegates of the customers in the board, not all of them, and they have different opinions on that. So that's different. If you're thinking on the customers, they are indirect involved because we have shareholders of the municipality and they are elected by the customers. And we think it's quite complex to involve in the decision the customers, but we're struggling with that. So we want to understand the opinion of the customers, what by doing or some interviews and impressive surveys by a large amount of customers. What do you want by this or this? But that's a study, that's not an obligation. And we're thinking, do we have to improve that? Well, then we're looking to the UK, for example, or other countries. And we are not convinced that it improves our decision, but maybe we have to study it better.
Apologies for my phone going off in the middle of that. Great. Thanks very much. I think we're at the time we're going to call it to an end and say thank you very much to Ryan. Again, please post any other questions in the chat, because we'll have a chance to deal with some of them at the end session. Thank you very much, Ryan. And we've got a 10-minute coffee break now. So, well, 9 minutes, I think. We start again at 15:40.
Thank you, Francis. I mean, my brain is so dead that I wouldn't have thought about the US if you hadn't mentioned that,
Yeah, I was just, yeah, it's an interesting one. I don't know very much about it, but look forward to reading more. Yeah.
And yeah, look forward to our conversations. I mean, the event is brilliant.
Great. We're rushing on a bit because I want to give enough space for the public questions.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's get going, everybody, because we've got time. We want to hear about the case of Germany and Berlin. So to start with, we're really delighted. We've got Dr. Vera Wegman here, who's the Director of Public Services International Unit. Her work focuses on essential public services, including but not confined to water and waste management. And her research has significantly influenced policy at the European level, contributing to initiatives in the European Parliament and the European Agency for Safety and Health at Work. Her research on remunicipalisation has supported global efforts to reclaim public services. So interestingly, she's also got a strong interest in amplifying the voices of precarious workers through arts-based methodologies. I caught something in the chat where Anne Lestrade was saying they'd also used arts-based methodologies in France. So that's something to look back on and pick out. So Vera, without much more ado, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. It's really great to be here. I'm super sad because I was just rushing back from Brussels, actually, and I was hoping that I could listen to everybody else's presentation on the train. But unfortunately, I missed everybody because the connection was so poor. So I will try to refer back to previous presentations of what I thought people might have said or, or what I know saw in the slides. But yeah, I very much look forward to the discussions here. And I would love to hear about the art in France. Anyway, to tell you about Germany, since this is my task for the day, I don't know how much Emanuele said about Cyrus, so I will probably skip my first slide. But just in case people don't know PSIRE yet, Public Services International Research Unit, just know that we are here and that we do all kinds of research, not only on water, on all essential services, everything you need in order to live, like not just water, but also electricity and healthcare and waste management and so on. And we very much do it always academic research, but also policy research, and very importantly for and with trade unions. And hence, I will also come from that perspective when I'm presenting about Germany today. And I picked a very interesting case to elaborate on as well. So all of what I'm going to say is already published in those two books, actually. They are not just reports. This one is already relatively old, 5 years now, but it's quite a comprehensive toolkit from PSI, which I co-authored, and actually Emanuele initiated. So a lot of credit what is in there goes to him. It is now an online toolkit on the PSI website. So where if anyone thinks or feel they need more training or want more training on remunicipalization, this is an e-learning course which covers basically everything what one needs to know in terms of reclaiming. And it covers 50 different cases all over the world, not just water, but also water. And some of the stuff which is in there is also in the second book, which is there 2021, which is unfortunately only available in German. It's a very detailed book on the German case. So yeah, if anyone wants to know more detail, it's in there. And I hope that some online tools could help some non-German speakers to understand if they really want to know more. But I will tell you everything in brief now. First of all, I believe Emanuele has already mentioned when he sort of introduced Germany that a lot of Germans' water still, and luckily actually even more so, is in public ownership. We saw so basically 70% of all drinking water is now delivered by public entities or public municipalities and different sort of legal arrangements. However, Germany also had, like many other countries in the world, its very negative experiences of privatization, and we shall hear about this more in the next talk. And consequently realized that since privatization is not a good idea, reversing what has been privatized. And that started this process in 2003. By now, we have 20 cases recorded in the Public Future database, which I believe is by and large accurate in terms of the cases in Germany. We saw the biggest Germany's largest water utility, Gelsen-Wasser, was municipalized in 2003. And then we had the big Battle of Berlin, which I will leave to the next presenter to say more about. And then recently also, just not even 2 years back, Weißenwasser at contract expiry. However, and this is the only thing I want to now talk about because about Berlin, not taking away from the next presentation, but preparing for the next case that I want to present to you in Germany. What I find striking about Berlin is that this privatization was reversed 28 years before the contract expired. It was a very, very expensive remunicipalization. A lot of compensation has been paid, Nonetheless, research by Emanuela and myself showed that it has been cheaper to remunicipalize Berlin rather than continuing with these massive price rises of 21% we saw immediately, well, almost immediately after the privatization, but this will probably be talked about in a bit more detail in the next presentation. But we saw very quickly a sharp price rise when the contract allowed this to happen after privatization, and then we see the benefits when privatization was reversed and water came back into public ownership. So even though it was so expensive, it was still a decision which also economically worked out. Yeah, so I just put down here all the different cases of remunicipalizations of water in Berlin. The one I would like to spend my time on now to talk with you about is Rostock. And Rostock was not so long ago, only 7 years ago in 2018, it was remunicipalized. And what is interesting here, that it was very well prepared, really well prepared. Like the trade unions and the community and also the Stadtwerke themselves, they started way before than 5 years actually, but then 5 years prior, it became quite serious and in all their endeavors, and they really organized in order to get the remunicipalization started. And I just lost my slide in order to see them better. There we go, got my slides back. Apologies for that. And what we also see is this really nice collaboration with the trade unions. So it was a very important case, and I come to that in Germany, because Eurowasser, which was the subsidiary, was a subsidiary of Remondis, very much wanted Rostock and did everything they could in order to keep it privatized, because they saw Rostock, which is in Eastern Europe, Eastern Germany, as an entry point to not only Eastern Germany but Eastern Europe as a whole. So they really wanted to see their company expanding via Rostock. So they even proposed in the end a way that this would have been financially completely not viable, just in order to have this flagship privatization in Rostock. It was a long privatization period, at least, well, not as long as as we might have talked about earlier, but at least 25 years. And what happened was, yes, it was privatized in the early 90s. This happened not only in Rostock, but also in several other Eastern German areas after the war came down, in this sort of hype of privatization. So nothing really new about this case there, but yeah, on this wave, a lot of those contracts, privatization contracts, came about. And then what was interesting is that there was quite a broad coalition with the trade union being on board, with different parties being in a broad political consensus that they wanted remunicipalization because privatization didn't work. Again, we had very high price rises after the privatization. So it was very much consensus, okay, it should go back into public ownership. But the private sector fight back, I find very striking, because, like I already explained, it was a flagship case, and they did something similar. I don't know if it was talked about, but Marseille, very much trying to do all the advertising in the community. They funded the very popular football club in Rostock. They did a lot of community events. They marketized the fact that the people who own Remondis come from the same region Rostock is based in, Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. So it was really like we really see the battle in action there, and also on a community level. But the community didn't want to have it, and they wanted to remunicipalize. So that was a very interesting way. And then once this was already decided, the company still tried to prevent it by basically not issuing certain data they needed to have in order to have this smooth transition between private and public. And then the trade union managed to help in getting all the contracts sorted, all the internal knowledge. So there was a very big collaboration, which I think is very striking about this case. But because we don't have so much time, I want to talk about another issue in Germany, which I find worthy to mention at a conference, many day exchange about water and how to keep water in public ownership or not. And that is, even though I just explained, and I believe Emanuela also already mentioned earlier, that in Germany there is most of the water is in public ownership, and a lot which isn't yet is being reversed back into public ownership. It doesn't stop Germany from advocating for privatization of water abroad. And this comes through this quite unique water lobby, which is called the German Water Partnerships. And their main objective is to facilitate that public German companies and public utilities, and that's a very important point, can expand their business abroad. However, so it's a bit like a PPP. So they promote privatization and liberalization. However, under German law, public utilities are not allowed to make money from operating abroad. However, what they did was very clever, and this is in the German Water Partnership sort of advocate this as a model. It was pioneered by Hamburg Water, and what they did, that they set up a subsidiary, and this subsidiary like the one was managing the finances and the other one was offering the technical expertise, and technical expertise was allowed to be offered. And then they used a lot of aid money from most importantly the German Development Agency, but also World Bank and so on, to open up the market, and even trying for German utilities to enter in a very similar, like to a privatized arrangement abroad. So I just wanted to put this in there as a warning. 7 lessons learned from this German experience before I pass on to the next speaker. One, best thing to do is never to privatize, including PPPs, and the Berlin case will show this even more when it will be properly discussed in the next session. However, we also know privatization can be reversed. Even if it's really expensive, like in Berlin, it still pays off. The Rostock example shows how it can be much cheaper if you prepare well and it comes after the contract's expiry. But we also see in Germany are these neo-colonial tendencies of facilitating privatization in the global south. And I must apologize, I have actually taken out the last few conclusion points because I was rushing this today when I came back. But that's it on Germany. If anyone here is more interested to discuss a German case, I just want to know that want everybody to know that I'm here. I'm very excited to talk about this more, and the details are in the 2 books reports that I have just shown. Thank you very much, everybody.
That's great, Vera. Thank you very much. And it's no mean feat to have just like jumped off a train and then have to do a presentation. So that's good. I'm really struck by something you said when you were saying about terrible high prices under the private system. I've just received my water bill this week and it's gone up by 31%. So for the next year. So yeah, it's a bit of a shock. For this, we're going to move straight on to the other presentation about Germany from Ross Beveridge, and then have some questions from the panel after that. Okay. So Ross, I'm glad to see you there. Ross is Senior Lecturer in Urban Studies at the University of Glasgow, and he pursues research interests in the urban politics of environment, climate and infrastructure. He's previously studied urban infrastructure in Europe, and particularly the politics of water privatization and remunicipalization in Berlin. He's written a book about that called The Politics of Inevitability, the privatisation of the Berlin Water Company. And he's also written a book, I was looking on his website, really interesting book in 2022 called How Cities Can Transform Democracy, written with a colleague, Philippe Koch. And I think really interestingly, because one of the themes that's coming through here is people's interest in, people's representation, citizen action, and so on. So that may be something we can return to. But meanwhile, over to you, Ross, to tell us what we need to know about the Berlin case.
Ross, do you want me to share or do you want to share?
Could you share, please, Becky? I think that would be easier.
There you go.
Yes, thank you, Francis, and everyone for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. It's such a great initiative and a sorely needed one. Yeah, so for me, talking about Berlin, I mean, Vera's already laid the ground a little bit for the Berlin case. Just a little bit of context from my side. I was when I was working on the Berlin case, it was my PhD research. So that was between 2006 2000 to 2010. So it was in a period where it was still privatized, and I was writing about it in relation to reunification and how the transformation of the city was bound up with the transformation of this water company. So this entity, a public company, state owned company, became part of the ambition to not only reunify the city of Berlin, but somehow make it a big global player after being apart from the global economy for during the Cold War period. So I'm going to come back to that. So it's important to know that. So when I was doing my research, I was talking about it as this kind of inevitable privatization. It seemed quite hopeless, remunicipalization. And I think there are some parallels there to thinking about the UK or the England and Wales context, at least today. So could we go on to the next slide, please, Becky? Yeah. So just to give you a very brief run through of the story, so to speak. So in 1999, the end of the 90s, a period of massive transformation in the city and in Germany as a whole. The water company, the Wasserbetriebe, was partially privatized. So it was just under 50%. So a fairly standard partial privatization for around 1.8 billion euros. And sold to RWE, the multi-utility company, German company, and what is now Veolia, the French water and environmental services giant. And it's sold for 1.8 billion, and it was sold in a context of what we now call austerity. The city of Berlin was struggling with reunifying the city, including the infrastructures, but ultimately it was a city ill-equipped to re-engage with the global economy, having been separated. So there were large debts accrued, and the privatization was seen as a way of meeting the debts. So it was a kind of a fairly standard kind of austerity measure in a way. So it wasn't necessarily about the argument that privatization was going to bring in great expertise, although it would facilitate commercialization. So what happened very quickly in the years afterwards, as Vera's already mentioned, there were very rapid price increases. And this had a lot to do, or was entirely to do with the privatization deal, which was a confidential set of documents. You know, it was essentially a business deal. It was of massive political and public interest. And there were guaranteed profits for the two private companies, RWE and Veolia, regardless of the performance of the company in that year. So there was something, it was aligned to around 8%. And I remember speaking to the consultants who were involved in it. the state of Berlin had consultants working for it, including Merrill Lynch, and they were looking to the England and Wales case as the kind of exemplar of what kind of privatization of the water sector should be, and they came up with this 8%. Ultimately, this 8% had to be paid regardless of what kind of revenue was generated, and it led to the Berlin government having to fund this 8% profit. And when it decided not to do that, prices went up very quickly, within 25% within a few years. So it generates huge profit. So within 10 years, there was the two partners, the private partners, had already recuperated 2/3 of their investment in the company. Alongside this, and the roots of some of the municipalization took place. There was a range of organizations which had always problematized and pushed back on privatization, but then there was a specific citizen campaign for initially not for clearly just for remunicipalization, but quite interestingly and quite successfully, tactically to focus on the publication of the confidential contracts between the state of Berlin and the two private partners, to essentially expose this guarantee of a profit, which everyone had denied, but essentially everyone who was informed knew there was a guaranteed profit. So they pushed and essentially scandalized the privatization deal itself, and linked that, of course, to rising discontent about the massive increase in prices. At a global level during this period, there's a shift. So in the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s, early 2000s, there was this feeling of, I think in the UK context, of new Labour with globalization setting a kind of parameters and constraints. You had to adapt to the global economy. Privatization was necessary to be competitive. All these kind of arguments, they started to crumble a little bit, increasingly start to crumble also after the global financial crisis. And alongside that, there are an increasing number of examples of remunicipalizations, particularly in Latin America. And these were quite inspiring and directly linked to the citizen campaigns in Berlin and other places. So Europe was, the citizen campaigns for remunicipalization were directly tapping into things that happened in Latin America. They were learning from other places. So anyway, so the remunicipalization happens in a kind of almost unexpected series of events. The privatization contracts get published. There's a referendum. You could have public referendums at the state level, the city level, in the case of Berlin, and they pushed for the publication, and the contracts were published, and essentially it became almost a mandate for remunicipalization. No one knows exactly the series of events, but essentially RWE pulled out first. 2012, there's an idea that they were moving out of the water sector. It's a multi-utility company, but there's no doubt that as a German company, they were experiencing reputational loss because of the case. And also, as Avira's mentioned, they received a huge amount of money to do so. Veolia initially said they were going to carry on. After a year, there seems to have been pressure from the state of Berlin for them to go. And eventually, and seemingly reluctantly, they do sell again for and very handsomely rewarded with almost 600 million euros. So since then, we've had a public company, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I mean, the main progress, of course, is you've had a big reduction in prices. It was an expensive privatization because debt. It was a debt finance remunicipalization, but the main thing is the reduction in prices, and there is accountability, of course, returning it to state ownership, something that we could only really dream of in the England and Wales context. I'll come back to the missed opportunity later. So can we move quickly on to the next slide? So I mentioned at the beginning, so when I was doing my research here, when it was still privatized, I was doing, a kind of reconstruction of the process. I was I don't know, 8 years afterwards. And I was talking to lots of people who were there at the time, involved at the time, and politicians who were in the government. It was during the period of the 2000s, and they were all saying, there's no way we can remunicipalize. We realize now it was a complete mistake, but it's completely impossible to get out of these 30-year contracts. So they were built. They were built in the privatization, partial privatization, was built into these contracts. So there's a really interesting dynamic that happens. So in the 90s, you had an inevitable privatization. It was inevitable because Berlin had debt. It needed to, seemingly, it needed to reduce its debt. There was no real alternative. That was the argument put forward. And Berlin did then receive, of course, some debt relief through the sale of it. Particularly quickly became a very unpopular privatization. But seemingly alternatives weren't possible until around the 2010s. And then things started to shift. And what's really curious about this period is that if you look at the graph there, the Schuldenstand is referring to the level of debt, the Berlin city of government is level of debt. So you can see it's actually from the 2001, so not long after the privatization. The city debt has increased massively through the period leading up to remunicipalization. So the debt was given as the main reason to sell the company, but actually what we see here, of course, is that the debt it's a different way of seeing debt, essentially, and indeed more debt was accrued to buy back the private partners out of their contracts. So ultimately, what's driving this is ultimately, of course, is politics. And politics precedes economics. The economist Keynes said, whatever we can actually do, we can afford. So there's a message here that governments need to pay attention to, is that debt can be accrued and debt can be stable, and debt can enable policy change and transformation. And when it's aligned to the public interest, in this case, that would be most desirable. So the next slide, please. So I won't say too much about this. So essentially what you have a return to a kind of the company the way it was in the mid-90s. So there was a commercialization strategy which preceded the privatization. It was a pretty disastrous commercialization, tried to make Berlin the water company global player. We've seen a return to a more modest and sensible idea of just providing water for the people who live in the city and sewage services. So there's been a shrinking of ambition and a shrinking of prices, 17% or possibly more. And there's been a return to public ownership. It's essentially the ultimate responsibility lies with the city, the coalition government. It's always virtually always a coalition government, so the city of Berlin. So there's accountability there. Can we go to the last slide, please? So I just want to raise one idea. So in the period where there was the municipalization, sorry, the slide before, I didn't mean the last one, so the one with the pictures. There were some alternative proposals to have what we would call probably a public-public partnership. So the idea here was that the public interest wasn't only represented by the state, but that there should be directly or there should be representatives of various public interests involved in the decision-making of the water company. So that would have been the workers of the company, been various citizens associations who would be involved in this. And this links to actually other ways of organizing utilities, which have a longer tradition in Germany, called Stadtwerke, which are multi-utility companies which are owned publicly and have actually been in other sectors, and particularly the electricity sector, have been used to advance public partnerships. And the very famous examples involve Hagen, where there was a remunicipalization, and it wasn't just a return to the state; it was a reimagining of what public ownership means, and this public-public partnerships involving citizens and representatives of citizens in the management of the company. So last slide. Sorry.
We've just got a couple of minutes, Ross.
Couple of minutes, yeah. So I'll rush through these. So
thank you.
So to misquote Muhammad Ali. Impossible is sometimes nothing. So it is possible to actually to change things. There is a real emphasis on building a critique. That's one of the important lessons of the Berlin case. Building a critique of the company and building a campaign, a set of coalition of interests against private ownership. There's obviously a link to more global things going on, which are difficult to control and understand. But the importance of actually campaigning in the city is really impossible to underestimate. So it's fairly standard story. Lots of ways in privatizing gain and municipalizing losses. There wasn't a huge decline in standards or infrastructural investment. This was really a deal about profit making and the turn on the increase on prices. What I would say is that public ownership is not a panacea. It doesn't solve everything. The roots of the problem in the water sector, in my opinion, and in the case of Berlin, are commercialization as well. So treating it as water, not as a public good or as a human right. Yeah, and I think then there's this real important idea of what is the public? What kind of public ownership do we want? I'll leave it on that note.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Ross. That's just really interesting, and also find it really encouraging to think that, ideas can change and the seemingly impossible can become possible. I think that should be our motto. Just going to give a quick chance to the panel to ask questions before we move on to the public questions session. Becky, do you want to kick off with any question? Okay, I'll skip. Kate.
Oh, okay. Hi. Thank you so much. Oh my goodness, so much. So much amazing information. The story of
You
Germany.
don't have to ask a question, Kate. We could save them for the chat if you want to. But
I just want to ask. So we're seeing remunicipalization in Germany. This is probably a question for Vera. Could it go the other way? Could we see privatization coming again? That's what I'm wondering. Because one thing I picked up in all of this is that it's not set in stone that it's public or private. It's fluid. And we are excited to see a return to public ownership. But could it go back again? Yeah, that's my question.
Great. Who'd like to answer that, Ross or Vera? Just pipe up.
I would say, well, I'll let Vera have the main say, but I mean, certainly in Germany, there is a stronger tradition of public ownership, municipal ownership. So it's possibly unlikely in the German context, but I mean, nothing, I suppose, seems that stable at the moment. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff that happened in the east of Germany, the privatizations. It was an opportunity taken by the private companies and a pretty shameful policy by the national government at the time to impose privatization on the east, the new Bundesländer, when in most of the west, in virtually all of the west of Germany, there wasn't privatization of the water sector. So yeah, Vera, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, thank you for being brave and going first. I think it's a good question. It's a really difficult one. I would agree with you, Ross. Hopefully, I would disagree with you. I mean, we have all seen the German elections recently, and like you said just now, the privatizations that we have seen have happened in the East. We obviously have a huge amount of AfD influence in the East, but it is not something the AfD is pushing for. And I would say it's really anchored in German society that certain essential public services should be public. It is, I don't know who read the work of Franziska Paul, which I think is really good in understanding also the culture around public ownership in Germany better, and this concept of Daseinsvorsorge. I can't remember how she translated it, but it's basically a rooted concept in German society that essential public services should be in public ownership. it is interesting, I think, in this context of the AfD not coming into government, but certainly having much more power and influence in Germany, that Daseinsvorsorge was actually a Nazi concept. Painful, isn't it? Very painful. It is, I would say even from a right-wing agenda, we have seen this, and Emanuela, Dave, and I, we are currently writing a paper about also right-wing and conservative remunicipalizations. That we see right-wing governments pushing for remunicipalization in terms of like our public services. We have seen this in Hungary. We have seen this, we have seen different examples across the world. In Germany, we have seen some remunicipalizations actually led, or at least in coalition led, by the conservatives as well. So this, I think, shows again the big consensus Ross was talking about of essential public services being public ownership. Of course, water is still we also have huge privatizations when it comes to hospitals, when it comes to rail. So it's not untouchable, and that everybody in Germany believes that public ownership is necessarily the only way forward. But I think in water, it's unlikely is the long answer.
Okay, great. We've got time for one short question, Ewan, if you want to ask a question here. Otherwise, we'll move on to the public questions.
I've got about 50 questions. Fantastic presentations, Vera and Ross, but I'd love to hear what other people's questions are. So perhaps we can follow up later.
Okay, great. So I think thanks very much, Vera and Ross. That's just really loads of food for thought. And as with others, if you do have, any other materials you want to share with us, please do so, so that we can do a bit more homework. Okay, so it's time. Everyone's sat there very patiently listening, but now it's time for you to have your say. We're welcoming questions or reactions, particularly reactions to something you've heard that you think is a good idea or could serve us well in the future, or that we should be thinking more about in the context of England and Wales. The themes that have come out of the questions are listed here, and I'm going to encourage you to raise your hands, although it's quite hard to keep track of everyone on screen. But I think I'd like to start with thinking about the democracy and people's involvement and localism. And I was just going to, very far back in the first presentation, I think Sheila Adam put up a question about that. And I wonder, Sheila, if you're still here, whether you'd like to raise a question or a comment about that in more detail.
Thanks.
Putting you on the spot. Yeah.
Yeah. It was just a request for information and advice, because in thinking about our response to the various commissions, it seems to me that involvement, participation of citizens is absolutely crucial, and could be just the right time to be doing that, as the continuing anger and frustration of the public about the state of our water companies builds. So it was almost like a top tips, and if based on experience in other countries, what sorts of things would influence politicians who've maybe heard of citizens' juries but may not have got much further than that, to think much more innovatively about how to get genuine participation, not just token stuff.
Great, thanks, Sheila. So have any of the speakers got us some top tips about how to secure citizens' participation? And I guess we're thinking about different things, not just being elected members on the local council, but how to engage with the citizens groups, the campaigning groups, for example, or people's assemblies or whatever. So any speaker want to volunteer, or does anyone else want to chip in with some ideas? If you could put your hand up or just speak up, we'll try and manage that. I think, is anyone volunteering? I think, yeah, Emanuela.
And Letitia as well.
Yeah, so, yeah,
okay,
Letitia's
sorry.
first. Yeah, Letitia.
Oh, Letitia, yeah. Sorry, I didn't see that. Yeah, Letitia.
In Montpellier, in the case Marine has already presented, we have a citizens committee, which was implemented on a voluntary basis. There is no legal obligation for this committee. And the municipality asked different people to take part to the committee, people representing association, people representing the workers, the labor organization, and which are working in the water services and in the local authority. And there were also some experts. For instance, I was member of the committee, and the objective of the committee was not only to prepare, to give a reflection on how should be the municipalization. We were also supposed to give advice on the main, the more important choice that would be done. So it was only to give advice. There was no votation, and the principle was to ask questions on the strategy of the service, for instance, on the tariffication, and to put together people from the local authority, people from the service, the workers, citizens, and also experts.
Great, thanks, Letitia. I think Jerry also posted something in the chat about the example of Spain might be a good one for citizens' participation. Jerry, do you want to say something about that?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Yes, well, in Spain, I think Emmanuel knows a lot about it as well. But there is the Red Agua Pública, the Citizens Water Network that is existing since a long time already. But they have this huge experience in how to engage people at local level for remunicipalizations. They have this experience with privatization, so they know about the dangers, and it has taken them a long time, but they had the endurance to connect all kind of different people, different groups. They have engaged the trade unions, the workers in water companies. They have engaged citizens as consumers, but also environmental groups, social activists. They have campaigned together what I studied with the indignados, the people that protested against austerity measures. So this huge coalition has managed to achieve this change in water management, water governance, and I think that's important. And if I look at the UK now, then I think, well, that's something where you might look into how to unite different groups, that you don't approach it from only a consumer perspective, but also from environmental, from women's perspective, for example. All different groups, bring them together, get trade unions involved, and make this broad coalition to change water politics, because it is politics.
Yeah.
And what did you say that was called again, Jerry? The Aqua?
The Red Agua Pública, that's Spanish for citizens water networks, or sorry, the public water network.
If you have any publications or reports or anything you can link us to, do post them in the chat, Jerry. That would be really interesting.
Yes, I will.
Sally Reckert makes the point that, yeah, but maybe citizens in England certainly want like low bills and better quality and don't want to have to pay to invest in the future. Sally, do you want to expand on that, or are you skeptical that involving citizens would have the right result?
No, I'm not skeptical at all. I think that, for instance, you calling this People's Commission is the right way to go. Whether it's private water, public water, it seems to be that securing the safety of our water supplies, getting the public to understand the need for long-term investment and how the politicians can be persuaded to focus on that over the need to make money in their various ways. And I think that beginning with children, getting them interested, we've seen that they then influence their parents, their families, and so there's a knock-on effect. Yeah, that was my point.
That's great, thanks. Yeah, it's interesting actually, since we, advertised this, then a number of people have got in touch, and a number of them are like arts-based organizations working with children or the public, trying to, educate people, if you like, about water systems and sanitation and so on. So there's quite a lot of that out there, but I feel it's not very joined up. It's like these little people doing their little initiatives here and there. Anyone else?
Francis, can I say something?
Yes, please.
I'm
Please
fed
do.
up of using different platforms, from Hangout to Teams to this, and so I can't find the hands up anyway.
Okay.
Apologies for that.
I wonder.
Fascinating stuff. It's so good to hear these stories actually. Sometimes in despair, really thinking, where we're at in the UK. It seems like we were the first to go into this dark hole of Mr. Milton Friedman and Thatcher, and it looks like we're going to be one of the last to come out of it, but that's a whole other story. In Wales, we have a variation on the theme where we have a private company. Most people don't realize that, but it's a private company that is actually not for profit. It's pretty meaningless. It's just investment via a different way. And in this case, it's a bondholders off the Luxembourg exchange that really get the returns, from Welsh bill payers. We have an interesting angle that we have a very big water company area, 1.3 million customers, so a low income base. I think we're the most expensive water in the UK, which is ironic for Wales. Trust me, I'm a Welshman. And we have this model really where we have a wet environment, a complex environment in terms of managing flooding and all the rest of it. And so we have a very broken model here. Even the idea around, for me, the idea around having this business model that was imposed upon us all those years ago, and it can suit somewhere like Wales all the way through to somewhere like London, for example, is just ridiculous. So we have our own challenges about making the change. Greatly disappointed politically that we've not seen the change come from this government and now the Welsh government. And I've just been really inspired actually by listening to these other stories and understanding how far advanced in thinking these other European nations are. And I've lived in Holland 6 years and lots of other places as well, actually. So it's really, really inspiring to hear these stories. And I'm no longer despairing this Thursday evening. So thank you so much for that. And if anybody's got any insight into an approach in a Welsh perspective, I'd always love to have contact and explain the unique situation that we have here in the UK. And maybe a question, and that is the funding. 1.3 million customers trying to fund a very complex Welsh environment is never going to work. It's a bit like, I always describe it actually when I'm arguing this point. It's like London saying, oh, we know everybody's going to pay for their transport. Well, it's ridiculous. It's such a complex and expensive system. Everybody gets a benefit. Well, it's the same for us. We've got a complex water structure, but we don't have the people to pay for it. So there has to be some income coming from somewhere else. Into and in Wales, I don't know if you know this, but they've actually recently put in a tourist tax. And I said, well, and everybody's complaining about it. I said, well, there's one thing you could do with that tourist tax, and that's invest in water infrastructure, because it's needed, at certain times of the year for sure. Anyway, I'll shut up now, but thank you so much.
Thanks, Kim. I think Maureen posted something funny in the chat about in the 1950s, I think in France, the bets on horse racing could be used for investing in infrastructure or for water or something.
There lies the story.
Yeah, maybe I could give an answer about what has happened in France.
Yeah, sure.
Because there is this problem also in France. As I mentioned, you have local authorities, very small, sometimes who have to deal with very complex situations that are beyond the capacity of the 1,000 people locally to fund the investment that is required in terms of treatment, in terms of different things. So in the 50s, where the issue was not so much pollution, etc., but the issue was to expand the network to rural areas. And that was this brilliant idea of the Ministry of Agriculture, who was managing and collecting all the taxes from betting on horses racing. And so they have used this money to create a fund that they were managing, and the engineers, the state engineers, were helping the local authorities to design their project, develop infrastructure, doing a bit of engineering consultancy work for the local authorities, were also distributing this money to help them to fund their pipes. Otherwise, we wouldn't have rich universal access. And then there was another mechanism set up in the 60s. You may know the model of managing water resources at the level of water basin. That is, we set up in France. And so we have 6 water basins. Within one water basins, there is one agency that collects taxes from all water bills on these water basins. And this money that is collected is then redistributed according to the needs of the local authorities. If there is a big pollution at somewhere, there might be subsidies to help funding these local issues that can't be borne only through the water bills by the people. So it's a kind of way to have this solidarity between the different territories. We know, for instance, that in the basin, including Paris, we know that the Parisians have helped fund through their water bills, have funded many investments in Normandy, for instance.
Great, thanks, Maureen. That's a lot of stuff I had no idea about, so that's really interesting to learn. I just saw Emily Shirley's written something interesting in the chat about the Aarhus Convention. Emily, do you want to just elaborate on that? It's back to the idea of public rights to participation.
Unmute myself, start video. Hello.
Hello.
I don't know if I can get the video going.
Well,
let me
mind.
just see. Never mind. As you can hear me, that's the main thing.
Oh yes, we can see you. Yeah.
Oh, you can see me. Good. No, the Aarhus Convention I think is important just because if we can use it to influence or persuade our politicians. And you were talking before, people have mentioned the idea of reaching out to other groups, and I think I think this People's Commission is excellent for just starting that process. But the Aarhus Convention is supposed to grant for all people who signed up to it, and the UK government is one of them, rights to environmental decision making. And that's rights to information, environmental information. It's right to participation in decision making, and it's also rights to an appeal of a decision that's not prohibitively expensive. And so it is something that we can use to our politicians, and we can write, for example, one could write to the government about the commission that we're not replicating, the one we're sort of complaining about, but trying to do a better job, and saying, well, actually, the thing that you're doing at the moment is just really not compliant with the Aarhus Convention. And if you really got to open it up for people like us and other groups and other people, because it's just in breach. And then if they how they respond, we can make a complaint to the Aarhus Convention Compliance Committee, and they can take it up and they can make recommendations. Unfortunately, they can only make recommendations, but it's very, very helpful in terms of putting pressure on. And it seems to be because everybody knows in England and Wales that we have a serious problem with water. That it is something that at least the politicians are willing to open their ears to, and it's something just to add to our various our armory, if you like, in dealing with the problem.
Great. Thanks very much. That's a really positive suggestion. Thank you. Becky, quick.
Yeah, just it'd be really good to hear from some of the campaign groups about what you think. So if politics precedes economics and it's the political will we have to change. Some of us are members of the Sewage Campaign Network, which is a campaigning activist organisation that's a founder of this People's Commission. But it'd be really good to hear from Kent and Swale and some of the others here, if you wouldn't mind. Just so, what do you think needs to happen now?
Anyone? Yeah, Deborah.
I think.
Where are you from, Deborah?
Sorry, I'm from Save Our Swale. I think when I was listening to Anne talking about Paris, the thing that she said was that you need strong political will to get something like this to be changed, and we don't have that at the moment. I'm not quite sure why. I think I was expecting better things, but we don't have that, and I think it's got to be the pressure then that we put on the politicians. And I think, as other people have said, this group is kind of the start of that, and that the Sewage Campaign Network, the People's Commission, is definitely the start. But I think I'd picked up on the point that Emily had put in the chat. I didn't know about that convention, and I just think that's another way in, because when we're kind of out on the street, on the market stall, and we talk to people about what's happening in the rivers, and people will either not know about it still because obviously they're just not tuned into it, or they do know about it and they're kind of supportive of that. But I think unless they're kind of actively wanting to get involved in a campaign like ours, there's no kind of way in for them, the kind of general public. There's no way in, no invite in to kind of put their point of view across. And it seems, just from hearing about the other countries, that the political will was there, and then the will to involve citizens, organisations, unions, and that all seem to have been organised kind of downwards from the relevant government or the authority. And I think we're obviously doing it, we're having to do that the other way, because this government is not doing that. They're kind of actively excluding the kind of, making it as difficult as possible, basically, for people to put their views forward. So in a way, I'm a bit kind of discouraged, because the examples we've seen obviously had that will, but I'm also encouraged because I think we are coming together. And when we started this in Swale in 2023, on the back of what Ilkley had done, we were very kind of disparate. There were these little campaign groups here, there, and everywhere, and now we are a bigger force. So it is a slow process, and it is, to get that change, but we have got to have a more concerted kind of citizen involvement, I think.
And just thanks, Deborah, just for your information. I mean, we have had a positive response from the All-Party Parliamentary Committee on Pollution to go and talk to them about this, People's Commission. And also, I think we're intending to talk to the All-Party Parliamentary Committee on Water as well. So I think when you say there's no political will, I think there are plenty of MPs who are interested.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. I mean, obviously, and I know Clive Lewis is kind of leading on this. Our own MP is not interested, and kind of that's the route, that you take. Yeah. I think from a local level, certainly our kind of local town council are on board, and we're getting into North Yorkshire Council, so we're kind of trying to get through those routes as well.
Yeah.
just chipping away.
Great, thanks, Deborah. Anne's had her hand up for a long time, and we might need to make this the last comment. I'm sorry.
Okay,
Anne.
okay, thank you. Just a quick comment. So absolutely, we and you need political will. But you know, when we decided to municipalize at the beginning, I was more or less the only one, you know, who care about that. So I think that it's possible to build the momentum, and you have to, yes, to put pressure on politicians, but also, and for me it's very important, to win. It's not only to say no, you know, and we are against that and we don't want that, but also to build an alternative, to see that it's possible to have another model. So of course you know, you can base your work on the other experience, but I think it's possible to build new alliance also with, you know, with activists, researcher, politician, unionists, a lot of different kind of stakeholders, and to think and to design a new model, an alternative. And really, it's important to show that it's possible, and it's possible because there is a base to build anything else. But not say only no, but for what and for which.
Yeah. So to have a vision and something positive, which I think is what we're trying to do here with the People's Commission. That's great. Thanks, Anne. I think to keep to time and to make sure you've all got time to get out in the sun, we're going to have to draw it to a halt now. With sincere apologies to those of you who might have wanted to speak, but I haven't called on you. I'm sorry, I could barely see who was raising their hands. But we've got a lot of stuff in the chat. And don't hesitate to also write the People's Commission email, which is up here on the bottom of the slide. You probably know already that we've got 3 other events. The next one's next Monday, but they're in person. So that's at Knaresborough, focusing on sort of resilience and so on. We've got one at Whitstable on the 1st of May and one in Henley-on-Thames. They're all on the website, so do have a look. And for anyone who can come to that would be absolutely brilliant. Becky, did you want to say anything else?
Yeah, just of course, I know you'll say thank you to everybody. It's I think I just posted in the chat. We have got the opportunity to share the People's Commission's work at a event in the House of Parliament before recess. As far as we've got, I think as many of you as possible, if you could come, I think it would show it's the public's view rather than just the 4 of us. I think that'd be really helpful. So do let us know if you're interested. I'll send out the date to everybody that's coming. That'd be really good. Getting us any evidence would be really helpful. Examples and stories are as good as the sort of academic research that we've had here today. So both of those really matter. Thanks, Frances.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate that, like, coming from an academic point of view, you know, our tendency is often to be critical and so on, but any evidence or examples of what works, however small, I think if we can sort of gather that together and share it, then that's really inspiring.